Yet I'm also reluctant to discount the changes that did occur at a micro political level. For these small changes from below mean that the women never go back to square one and have an alternative way of accounting for themselves. They are very proud of the way they were recognized by both their community and the state. And their emergence and resilience after disaster was important for the entire community itself, to which the narrative belongs in the first place. There is evidence here that while the state remains the locus of women's demands, women have conscientized and mobilized only where the state has become a tangible presence in their lives. That is, in this way, in this instance, through this local bureaucrat and the setting up of the WRDS. It's an intrusion. The state intrudes. It's true. It also can enable. Evident in this story of Burger women, therefore, is an entanglement of the feminist goals of emergence, change, and associational politics that sat beside the paternalism of a state in a continuation also of looking at women as embodiments of thrift, responsible debtors, and small-scale entrepreneurial subjects. Nivedita, in her keynote address at the opening of this conference, reminded us that women do not constitute a stable category. Rather, it is continuously destabilized when it intersects with other identities, such as caste, but re-stabilized by governments when it deploys women as a synonym for gender in developmental work, because governments need beneficiaries, needs voters, and needs women's skills, like thrift and so on, to make their programs work. I would add another register of instability. It is precisely because we, as feminist scholars and activists, sometimes recognize in women's rural development societies a feminist impulse, and sometimes we don't. Because we sometimes see ourselves in this gender and development work, and sometimes we don't. Because this work sometimes borrows from feminism and at other times stays firmly within patriarchal paradigms, that it produces a crisis of recognition. This tells me that even as many of the papers here affirm that feminists no longer hold on to rigid binaries, the entanglements of the borders still produce a needling disquiet. And I think this disquiet was kind of articulated by us in different ways, as co-options, or as depoliticization, and so on and so forth. What then should be our critical task in this context? Is it to augment feminism so that it augments that vision of development, or reject it altogether? Is it to understand that as a single issue, an initiative like the WRDS, which in this case was a strategic intervention on the part of the state to enable the Burgo women to recover from the tsunami, does qualify as political and feminist work when it works for change? Had the WRDS from its inception held on to its larger vision, it may have been more durable. This is where a feminist insistence on being multifocal would have helped, but it did not. Yet a focus on the single issue or goal cannot be dismissed either. Kadri Ismail argues that the singular is best understood not as the perspective of a lesser in number, but as the one opposed to finding significance in number. This is a particular training and privilege that we from literature studies have, because of literature's reliance on the story and resistance of the single individual and community, right, that makes us value the singular for what it tells us about majoritarianism and hegemony. Anyhow, if the goals of the WRDS were single-minded, my argument here is that at this particular point of time it was enabling. But as discussions at this conference have also flagged, there is an ethical tension here. Because who are we to dismiss women's strategizing demands for credit and livelihoods? So I see here what Nivedita was asking us to do, which was a solidarity based on context, and she called it conjunctural solidarities. That also does not dismiss all government initiatives as suspect, as she herself has written in Sing Like a Feminist, particularly when the participants of its programs recognize some good. Moreover, as my next story indicates, there are dangers of a hegemonic insistence on long-term structural transformation to the detriment of all else. So my second story comes from the north and east of the country and is located in the context of the very tragic mass enforced disappearances that have taken place in Sri Lanka. We have a very tragic long history of it before the war. First with the 1971 JVP insurrection, and then later with the 1987 second JVP insurrection and the war. In fact, in 2013, Sri Lanka was recorded by the UN Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances as recording the second highest number of enforced disappearances worldwide, the first being Iraq. The latest presidential commission, popularly known as the Paranagama Commission, appointed to inquire into these disappearances, noted as of 10 September 2015 that it had received 18,099 civilian complaints and 5,000 cases of missing Sri Lankan armed force personnel. And in all of these years, there have been no less than 7 presidential commissions that have been appointed to look into this issue, and all of them have received approximately 64,831 complaints of disappearances, and this really points to the scale and the gravity of the problem. Women have borne the brunt of these disappearances, and what I want to focus on here is the varied expectations of justice on the part of mothers and wives of the forcibly disappeared, which show how justice claims works on different registers, making a one-size-fits-all mechanism inadequate. In my own work with Chula Nikodikara on justice claims after the war, we heard women for whom judicial accountability was non-negotiable, while there were others who wanted a kind of forgiveness and getting on with life, and yet others for whom justice was decisively about the return of their sons, and yet another one who wanted a truth forum where, as she said, I quote, "women of all communities could weep together." The diversity of these claims is further illustrated in a recent study by Jahangir, which found a correlation between the denial of contextual legitimacy and the general demand for perpetrators to be held accountable. In other words, it found that victim survivors, if the crimes occurred during an inadmissible context, like after the war had ended, there was a greater demand for accountability and punishment of perpetrators of the crime. There was commensurately less interest, according to Gunathilaka, in the identification and prosecution of perpetrators if victim survivors accepted the context of a dirty war in which the harms occurred. The palpable anger evident at civil society meetings I have attended of mothers whose children had surrendered or were surrendered by their parents or parish priests to the Sri Lanka military after the LTT was defeated around 13th May 2009 supports this finding of a correlative between context and expectations of justice. All of this is to say that justice claims are varied, and this is one of the complexities transitional justice programs have to deal with. I anticipate that the report of a task force that has been currently appointed to consult with war survivors on what these mechanisms should be will capture this complexity. But the point I want to stress here is about narrative hierarchy, where the emphasis on criminal accountability, for instance, often sidelines restorative and reparative justice claims that are predominantly made by women. A common demand of war-affected women, whether at commissions of inquiry or civil society meetings, has been an increase in their asset base. This is invariably coded as a family house with which mothers can give their daughters in marriage, for teaching jobs for their daughters in a government school, so that means a tenured job. Yet there have been times that these demands have been dismissed, mainly by Tamil men and political forces as well as feminist groups. At a meeting organized, for instance, from the Law and Society Trust held in Colombo in March 2016 this year, the chairperson of the panel, a male member from the North, boldly declared soon after a mother of a disappeared son requested a house for her family, "Our interest is not for reparations, but accountability." This effectively silenced, if not shamed, the mother in public. Accountability in this context would be an important precursor to long-term political and security sector reform. The necessity for this in Sri Lanka to move forward is not in question. Don't get me wrong, I am not saying this is something we should not have. Yet, as Margaret Herbert Walker has written in a recent essay published in the Journal of Transitional Justice, in the advocacy around individual reparations, a false dilemma is often set up, resulting in a polarization between a structural transformative justice on the one hand and reparative individual victim-centered justice on the other that can and often does fall short of structural change. In the Sri Lankan case, this dichotomy gets expressed as a choice between the justice that implicitly values judicial accountability over forms of reparation, including compensation, that predominantly target women on the basis that they are merely remedial and returns them to an individualized status quo. But if we actually listen to the women, we would hear a finely articulated critique of this kind of unmeaningful reparation. I heard one Tamil woman scorn the reparative developmental aid currently on offer by declaring, "You cannot reduce my life to a few chicken and goats." What the women want, therefore, is an irreducibility and a commensurate increase in their asset base, something more than what they had before the war. And this would give them a subjectivity as bearers of rights and subjects of justice, who are owed a higher standard of living than before. For the women concerned, such forms of reparation would constitute a form of justice that is both restorative and transformative. Apart from the political investment in accountability, one reason why women's demands for reparation is not heard is because there is little conversation in Sri Lanka today about what each of these four pillars of transitional justice actually entails. Currently, reparation is widely understood in the country only as payments, because it is dispensed as such, paid at a flat rate, irrespective of women's needs and individual circumstances, and mired in bureaucratic proceduralisms that treat Tamil citizens, Tamil women as suspect. So in other words, if your son was disappeared, you must be an LTTS sympathizer. My point here is that when women are strategizing a way forward in their lives, they do not reject accountability. Their silence on this cannot be read as their indifference or refusal of it. Rather, it should be read as their emphasis on a different kind of temporality and sequence in the way they would like justice to roll out. But their demands are thought of as depoliticized, domesticated, and inconsequential for the larger picture. We have to be attuned here to an oversignifying patriarchy that some feminists are also aligned with, which, in the service of discourse on transformation, ranks justice claims in terms of authenticity, and thereby undermines women's capacity to choice and agency. Because as Naila Kabir also has written, choice is where different prioritizations can occur, while agency is also the place of dissent. I come now to my final third story, which is the current constitutional reform process underway and takes us back to how women in Sri Lanka, particularly in the north and east, address the state. I am aware of the pitfalls of constitutionalism and overdependence of the state. However, my example points to how women at the grassroots have produced a knowledge frame about themselves that is also about redefining the collective. If, hopefully, the state and its elites take these women seriously, this would be a very meaningful bottoms-up approach to constitutional making that we in post-colonial Sri Lanka have never experienced before. An election pledge of the new Sri Lankan government that came into office in August 2015 was the reformation of the Sri Lanka constitution, also conceived of as a tool of ethnic reconciliation and transitional justice. Widely talked about primarily as a mechanism for devolution of power, the government established a broader mandate of reform, and towards this established a 20-member Public Representations Committee, or PRC, that held hearings in all parts of the country from January to end March 2016, with the mandate of seeking oral and written submissions of Sri Lankan citizens on their vision of a new constitution. These sittings received over 4,000 written and oral submissions, comprising one of the most exciting acts and moments of participatory democracy that's unfolding in Sri Lanka today. Sluggish at first, women's groups had to be nudged to go forward to the PRC to make its submissions. But women's groups finally coalesced with organizations like Women in Media Collective, Women's Development Center, so on and so forth, to have a wide range of consultations in the 22 districts with women prior to their submissions. According to Kumudini Samuel, a renowned feminist that we all know, who participated at these discussions, there was an overwhelming demand by the women, particularly in the north and the east, for the constitution to guarantee social and economic rights as fundamental rights. This may seem obvious to many, but in fact the discourse of social and economic rights has had a checkered history in Sri Lanka. From being a topic of discussion and inspiration for mobilization in the early 1980s, when autonomous women's movements and peasant groups, etc. got together, it became suppressed, made dormant and invisibilized at a national level by the political upheavals of the second JVP insurrection and the war that shifted the emphasis from socio and economic rights to ethnic and national question, as this was framed, and its correlatives in championing civil and political rights. Kumudini Samuel notes a time when, with the formation of associations such as the Movement for Interracial Justice and Equality, many of these people had actually come from social movements that mobilized around socio-economic rights. At meetings, they could not even talk about socio-economic rights. They were shut down on the basis that what was necessary was a discussion of the ethnic question and the national question. Because this was also the time of torture, of detentions, of arbitrary extrajudicial killings, and so on and so forth. And so civil and political rights was on the debate. And this work soon dovetailed into accessing, and in the plantations too, the work soon dovetailed into advocacy around free, detained Tamil plantation women workers. While this points to a specific Sri Lankan context of a militarized state and the war, that legitimized one discourse of a group of rights at the expense of another, thereby also constructing a boundary between them. The sidelining of socio-economic rights also occurred, of course, as we have talked here, due to the global project of capital and the depoliticization of communities and individuals within the developmental drive. It was also sidelined because of the concentration of some work that all of us took part in, which was on SGBV and violence against women. Now, much of the more nuanced work on SGBV, of course, made the link between social and economic rights. However, once again, the focus of address of this work was the state, legal reform, and better law enforcement. Given these realignments in emphasis, how does one explain what seems like the sudden re-emergence of the discourse on social and economic rights, and why is it particularly addressed by women? Based on citizens' submissions, the PRC report of May 2016 recommended in its chapter on directive principles that the state should ensure an economic system that does not result in the concentration of wealth and means of production detrimental to the common good, that it ensures social security, maintains general welfare, and provides assistance as necessary to all citizens without partiality, that it is duty-bound to ensure social, economic, cultural, and political rights of all citizens, that it is duty-bound to promote social equity by ending poverty and marginalization, and that it is duty-bound to ensure economic rights through systemic public policies on land, water, forests, minerals, housing, education, language, agriculture, health, and so on and so forth. The PRC also recommended that work, livelihood, and employment be enshrined as fundamental rights in this new constitution. While the PRC does not specify that these were predominantly women's demands, observers of the process mark it as such. Harini Amarasuriya, PRC member, noted that while many men who came before it flagged these rights, specifically in relation to the inequality of resource distribution and displacement of land, I'm quoting from her now, all the women who came before us did. Again, there was a big rally held in Colombo last week on the new constitution organized by the Law and Society Trust. There was an estimated 1,000 strong, okay, maybe for Pakistan, the Pakistani scale 1,000 is not very much, but for Sri Lankans 1,000 is a huge number, out of which about 80% were women, and bar none, all of them were really fighting for this. If standpoint incorporates the vantage of being situated, specific, and local, the standpoint of these women from the north and east who connect the dots between socio-economic rights and civil and political ones emerge from their experience as war widows, sudden heads of households, survivors of multiple displacement, and loss of family members. It is also governed by, or that this re-emergence of their discourse is also governed by certain conditions of possibility. First, of leadership. Many women leaders of community groups today are those who in the 1980s were members of grassroots movements that mobilized against the fallout of market-oriented, the open economy policy that came to Sri Lanka in 1977. Second, the end of the war and political violence until we knew it, until January 2015, has enabled an engagement with the state. Throughout the war, the political upheavals of the JVP uprisings and the militarization of the former Rajapaksa government, women's groups aligned to feminist ones stood firmly against the authoritarian state and invested their labor in legal reform. The debate over the over-dependence of human rights on legal reform notwithstanding, this work placed high hopes on the judiciary, with an emphasis on judicial accountability and justiciability rather than state reform. Certainly, with both the end of the war and change of government, the Constitution has opened up as a remedial space, a pathway to address and make demands of the state. So, to conclude, I began by citing a feminist manifesto that calls for a play on the root gens towards a regeneration of the interpretive keys we use. In my own talk, this primarily involved a self-reflective exercise through mapping registers of knowledge and practice in our own thought and work, our own standpoints, when and how we should embrace single issues, when and how we silence women, and the anxiety produced when recognition between feminist and gender work becomes a slippage. What should be our critical tasks in this context? Many of us have raised this question. Farida raised this very provocatively in the question in the session we had in the morning. It's about re-examining the separations of the center-periphery, the levels of engagement, the multiple actors that women engage with and resist, not just the state. Who is the norm? I mean, I don't want to repeat what has been happening. We know the questions that have been asked. Not many answers, we don't have the answers now. But I'm sensitive to Farida's call that we construct, even as we deconstruct, and that we come to some kind of understandings in this journey forward. And I'm hoping that, in a way, this conference has been the start, and I think it will be the start of how we reflect deeper with more nuance on these questions. Finally, I have been thinking, Farida, about your statement about the Kyrgyzstan women's movement and your suggestion that they're probably adopting a very novel and fresh approach because they were isolated. But Nibi and I have both been talking at this conference about the amazing strength we have received as a South Asian feminist network. People of my generation look upon all of you as heroes and also of what happened with nostalgia. Many of us look back, for instance, at a 1992 conference organized by Kumari Jayawardena in Hendala in Sri Lanka as a watershed. And in the 1990s and 2000s, there were regular meetings, visits, cross-border friendships that we nurtured, despite or in spite of our states, and particularly at times of tension. This led to common work and common goals within a similar temporal frame. Also, of course, enabled by the UN Beijing process and so on and so forth. Going only by the South Asian feminist scholarship that I am familiar with, I am struck by how Kumari Jayawardene and Nigat Said Khan from Sri Lanka and Pakistan were documenting women's movement histories around the same time. Of how Farida Shahid and Rani, amongst others, drew attention to feminist work on law and legal reform when they published Shaping Women's Lives, Laws, Practices and Strategies in Pakistan in the late 1990s. Of the trenchant critiques of the state produced by Patricia Jaffrey and Amrita Basu in The Appropriating Gender, or Rajeswari Sundarajan's The Scandal of the State, or Saba Gul Khattak from Pakistan's work on the state at the same time that many of the Pakistani feminists like Saba were taking on their militaries and their states. Of how Rubina Sehgal and Nina Hussain, who edited Engendering the Nation also in the late 90s, wrote against the hyper-nationalism at the same time that feminists like Mala Vidyalvis and myself included in Sri Lanka were responding to the rise of ethno-nationalist movements in Sri Lanka. Of how we responded to the rise of women's militants in our countries. Tanika Sarkar and Urvashi Butaria publishing Women from the Hindu Right in 1995, Anuradha Chenoy writing on militarism in South Asia, and Sri Lankan scholars like Darini Rajasingham and myself again working on LTT women combatants and militarization. And of how feminists like Roshni Goswami from the Indian Northeast, Kamla Basin, Kumudini Samuel, Sunila Abesekara, and Amina Moshin from Bangladesh engaged with women in conflict zones and peace building. The names I have left out are much longer than those I have mentioned, which is to say, we have something here amongst us and within us as South Asian feminists that is worth preserving. Therefore, I am really very grateful to the Center for Excellence in Gender Studies at Quaid-i-Azam University for inviting us here to reconnect and rekindle our commitment to each other as an epistemic community engaged in producing knowledge and practice. And I hope, my fervent hope is that you can have regular discussions of this nature and that discussions within and amongst South Asia are very different, very important also to see how similar forces like globalization, development, human rights, etc. are taking on different trajectories within and amongst each of our countries. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Professor Neloufer, for your wonderful and comprehensive talk. We'll like to have discussion on this talk, but after our chief guest, honorable chief guest address, because he has certain other commitments. So without further ado, I would like to call upon our honorable chief guest of this closing ceremony, Ms. Asma Jahangir. She is a human rights lawyer and activist based in Pakistan. She has been considered as an icon for all those who have been struggling and have struggled for human rights in Pakistan.
Thank you very much, Vice-Chancellor, Member Parliamentarian, Neloufer and Farzana, some of our old friends who talked about feminism, eaten feminism, breathed feminism, and yet want to continue to know what feminism is all about. And I think that shows their commitment to feminism, and many other young and old people in the audience that are some familiar and some not. I must start because I am following Neloufer, which was an excellent paper. Though like a professor, it was a marathon paper. But I hope that I don't follow in the marathon bit. But I cannot actually follow it because it was an intellectual paper and I am a very ordinary lawyer. So my paper, my talk will not be intellectual, it will be practical and the experiences that one has had. While I was sitting here, we talked about different ways that people look at not only feminism, but a woman's body. And that is fine, but now I've discovered they don't only look at a woman's body, they imagine a woman's body. Because I was in court just a few days ago, and there was a petition in the court saying that the Lux advertisement should be banned. And the petition was filed by the leader of the opposition of the Punjab Assembly. And so the judge said, what is there in the Lux ad that we should ban it? And he said, well, there is a woman there, but you can imagine that if she's bathing, that she must be naked inside. So, this is our imagination as far as women are concerned. I beg your pardon with the little knowledge that I have about various theories about feminism. For me, it means is to feel a sense of dignity for being a woman. And that is feminism for me. Not to be apologetic because I'm a woman, but to feel proud of the fact that I'm a woman. I have also noticed, and we've all talked about it, that we have come a long way. We have to go a long way, but we have also come a long way. We have learned many lessons. There was a time when many of us thought that feminism was non-political. There were others who felt that nothing is non-political. I think that when you have your breakfast in the morning, even that is political. So we have come a long way in that respect. We still lack the ability to mainstream ourselves. And this is the time for us to be self-critical as well. Although there has been outreach, there has been more women, despite the state, who have come in professions like my own profession, legal profession. There are some magnificent women lawyers that are there now. But in the old times, there were a few of us. Many of us hardly ever went to court. But I was surprised to hear that there are less singers, but when I open TV, I see more women singers now. But maybe I don't have the right statistics. Women have pushed the envelope themselves. The state has not helped us. And even where the state pretends to help us, it does not have the courage to take the matter to its logical conclusion. And one of the examples is the Women's Protection Law. While the law itself is quite emancipated, but the mechanisms that were to be set up within the law have yet to be set up. And there was such a debate about that law, particularly as our member of the Council of Islamic Ideology criticized the law in very ridiculous manner, I should say, that we didn't have to do awareness about the law. Everybody knew what the law was all about. And women were very excited about the law. As soon as it was passed, we got several phone calls saying, where do we go, whom do we do, what do we do? But we were at a loss, and we had to tell them that until the mechanisms are not set in place, there's not much that you can do. I have also been pleased to say that women in Pakistan have played a pivotal role, perhaps not so much as expanding the frontiers as much as we could have, but we have played a preventive role. And that is a fact because when our neighbors in Afghanistan were not letting women out of the house, putting them in chadar and chardiwari, the same slogans were being reheard here. But it was a small but a very dynamic and a committed women's movement that actually stopped Pakistan's policymakers at that time from going as far as the Taliban did. But I do recognize the fact that the women's movement in Pakistan and the feminist movement in Pakistan has not been strategic. Their outreach is not organized. For example, they have not been able to touch various professions where women dominate. For example, professions of nurses, professions of doctors, professions of women who are cotton pickers, and these have been done intermittently, and there are no networks that have been formed, so that we should have been ready at a time when we had a revival of democracy. The fact that we do have a vote is a very powerful tool in the hands of women in a democratic system. I am quite certain that PMLN would not have talked about honor killings or women's protection bill, because it was the same government some years ago that said that honor killing was part of our social norm if they were not counting the votes on the ground of women. So I believe that there is a lot of work to be done there. A lot of work of training each other. I mean, for example, if somebody was to ask me women's economic rights, I am really at a loss, because I have not been trained by my colleagues who work in that field to be able to give me that kind of expertise that can be passed on to other women, and then this is a chain that we build. And I realized this certainly, that many women activists also were not aware of not only the law but the procedures of law. Because sometimes we even got a power of attorney, which is a lawyer's power of attorney, which is just stereotyped. NGOs checked it and sent it to us and put commas and full stop. And we had to tell them that, like, this is not something we can change, this is only something that the courts can change. The challenge that we face is not only the state itself, because despite the face of an emancipation that the state puts up, there are strong resistances against the advancement of women. But we also face challenges from traditions and religions. And I say that because we've had a little bit of discussion this afternoon, but I simply cannot find a single tradition I can find, or a custom, but yes, I can find culture which includes women, but not custom or tradition which is not anti-women. Starting from the time that a woman is born to the time that a woman is dead and she's out there for her burial, that so-and-so cannot touch her dead body and so-and-so cannot come near her, and she has to be necessarily taken to her grave by men rather than women. And we may hear cliches all the time saying religion gives women maximum rights, but the fact remains that no religion gives women as much rights as they give men. And therefore, some of my colleagues in the bar have often argued with me that, look, we are superior to you because God is a man. And I said, why so? He said, if he wasn't, then he would give you as many rights as he gave us. So, in any event, I think it's that question of tradition that we have to break. And I know that it is the most difficult one. The tradition that a girl must stay at home and a boy can go out. The tradition that a boy must have better food than a girl. The tradition that a boy must be educated as a priority rather than a girl. These are things which we need to address, not only between ourselves, but believe me that there is common sense out there. And when you go and talk to women, they do understand that this is a necessity. And because they themselves are sufferers of this handicap, they try their best now, and that emancipation is there amongst women, to try and give as much as they can to their daughters or to fellow women in their community. But I have also noticed that we shy away from irrational kind of logic that is given to us, which is based or not based on tradition, but at least what it is labeled under tradition itself. For example, if you see some of the reports of the women's commissions, in every commission report, not only in Pakistan, but the ones that I've seen in Bangladesh and elsewhere too, the justification for a second marriage for a man, that how a man should be allowed to marry a second time or a third time or a fourth time, the justification always is, and I'm surprised that's how minds work together, that if the woman is paralyzed, then what will you do? So you must have a second marriage. So one day I was said to our very honorable religious scholar that when a young girl comes to us and she asks me, why is this the law that a man can have a second, third or fourth wife? Should I tell her that, my dear, you can get paralyzed, and therefore wait till you get paralyzed, therefore the husband has the permission to marry second, third or fourth time. Now this insidious kind of logic that is shared, I have always wondered whether it is meeting of minds where they have never really met themselves, or is it some kind of a network that shares these irrelevant and illogical facts with each other. But I do believe that whatever strategies or tools the feminist movement uses, this is my experience, and I think that we all have shared this experience. Why a women's movement should be different to other movements is that we must have integrity in the movement. We cannot explain away things, we cannot be apologetic, we should not use cliches, but we should be forthright in what we want, because after all what we want is our rights, and it's not a sin to want your rights. I also feel sometimes that when we are talking about empowerment, we lose a certain section of very important women in our society. For example, political workers, female political workers. Yes, we have worked with parliamentarians and we should work with parliamentarian women, but the ordinary political worker who is taken out only in the times of protest, where she is beaten up and forgotten, is someone that we have not worked with that often, and used her the same way as her party uses her. Whenever we have demonstrations, we call them up and they turn up, get beaten with us and go back. I think to empower them within their own party is also a grassroots work that we need to do. There are several issues that we have to look at. For example, not only in Pakistan, but other places as well, we have common problems, the common problems of citizenship. There are several cases that we are doing where a woman is a Pakistani and the husband is not a Pakistani. And these cases continue to drag in courts. Very recently we are doing a case in which Khabar is also a petitioner, and it's coming up on Tuesday in the Supreme Court. Women's right to vote, where women were not allowed to vote, and the election was cancelled. But the case was lost in the Peshawar High Court. We are now sitting in the Supreme Court. Why I talk about this is that I know that law and courts are not the only tools that we can use. In fact, I think law is hardly a tool to be used. More laws are discriminatory against women than otherwise. But it gives awareness, it gives women a hope that they can get some kind of justice. We have not worked at all, and I regret that we have not done it, with refugee women in Pakistan. There are thousands of them, and we have heard not only journalists but also judges saying, turn the refugees out of the country. And there have been several demonstrations of women who are Pakistanis married to Afghan men who have forcibly been deported. There's not enough work being done there. And the fact is that we should also, because if we want to be recognized as a movement with a difference, we should also be filling up gaps. And the fact that we did fill up at one point the gap of peace building was very much appreciated. And we need to go back to that peacemaking role that we had, particularly nowadays, because I thank all of those who come from other countries, because we seem to be looking for friends nowadays. So I think that even peacemaking and women refugees is one of the areas that I've often encouraged young people who come to ask me what should they do, that these are the work to do. Because let us not flog a single issue so much that people get tired of it. I have at least 56, I counted, in the last 6 months invitations to seminars on honor killings. And those 56 seminars, it was the same 68 people. So let's expand our horizons as well. And also to admit, like anybody else, that yes, women can make mistakes, like other people can make mistakes, and that they have a right to their mistakes as well. It's very important when I talk about activism as such, the kind of vocabulary we use in activism. It is important because you want to attract, and the medium of language, even that we use with, I mean, obviously this is Quaid-i-Azam University, but when we go out, we must, for example, be very inviting so that more women can come and join the movement. But there are certain issues which make me unhappy, and those are where we go overboard. While we ask for equality for ourselves, and we believe in affirmative action, we deprive sometimes others of due process. I'll give you examples that there have been many discussions, sometimes with activists who want to change the onus of proof on the accused to prove a crime. That means that if you are depriving away somebody else's due process. So I think that while we want affirmative action, we have to draw a line that we are not taking away somebody else's fundamental rights while asking for affirmative action on ourselves. The question, for example, of mens rea, meaning was it deliberate, was it intentional or not, in case of sexual harassment. Because in our society, when you look at sexual harassment, it's not that men are not even aware, they don't even know. I mean, for example, if you see my mobile, I'd be happy to show it to you. The lawyers have written to me saying, I am your lover, madam, but doesn't mean that he's really my lover. That's the way he says it. And you have an organization here called Lovers of Aung San Suu Kyi, and people will fondly touch your head or fondly pat you at the back. So I think that those questions are something that we need to really look at with greater compassion, and to be able to discern who are role models. If your role model is a woman who herself is a second wife and abusive to the first wife, then I think that the integrity part of our movement will be lost. And we have done that often enough. I would just bring up two more things, that there was a question of LGBT here. In my view, it is tolerated in Pakistan as long as you don't mention it. And when I was a UN rapporteur, I talked about LGBT in my report, and all the missions of Muslim countries came and said to me, but we don't have this problem. So I said, if you don't have the problem, then why are you protesting? Because I am talking about Brazil. But when I see the problem here, it is very well tolerated. So if you sometimes, when people are living in self-denial about it, you have to strike it at the right time rather than do no harm to those who are actually can become victims of prejudices. But as far as women's rights are concerned in this country, let me tell you that though I have great hope in women, and I see it from the grassroots upwards, we have had women in every sector of Pakistani society who have been spectacular in their own way. We need to mainstream men as well. Because it's not just the way they talk about it, they don't even know when they are addressing women. And this goes for judges as well. For example, they will call a woman a runaway woman, but the man is not the runaway man. the woman is the runaway woman. And what to talk about runaway woman? For the last 4 years, we women lawyers in the Supreme Court don't even have a toilet to go to. So this is the treatment of women in our own country. And I think that it is extremely important when I talk about strategy that we take institutions that matter, for example, a few parliamentarian judges, even lawyers for that matter, that we sensitize them on gender. And then we build our networks at the grassroots level, or even at the student level, so that we have an emancipated or a constituency of women who believe in women's rights and who believe in human rights to go out and protest and to go out and show that they are in numbers. The reason today that we are losing every battle eventually is that there are enough right-wingers who can go on the road, but there are not enough women who can go on the road, though in numbers we are more than them. And that is our job, to mobilize each and every woman in this country, because after all, most women do want their rights, and most women do have the common sense and the horse sense to be able to join a movement. If it is a movement that speaks to them, if it is a movement that is inclusive, and it is a movement that has integrity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Asma Jahangir Sahib. I'm afraid we are almost tight on time, so can we quickly have a short round of maybe 1-2 questions for the discussion? Okay, so we'll continue with the program. So now I would like. Okay. So can I call upon Dr. Farzana Bari, the Director of Center of Excellence in Gender Studies.
Good afternoon or good evening, Assalamu alaikum. I just took time from Farzana Bari. I just wanted to, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me, Dr. Javed, Madam Asma Jahangir, Farzana Bari, guest from Sri Lanka, I just wanted to say that it's such a learning experience to come here and learn from such great personalities, because in Parliament, even if we have reached the Parliament, we do suffer this problem of gender inequality. And I think I would be very daring to accept it here, because it is probably not appreciated to even accept it so openly from a parliamentarian. And the examples you gave about the Punjab Assembly, there is another one that once a lady member, when I was MPA, before becoming an MNA, there was a lady who was like shouting to a man or something, and she threw something from her bag, and it was maybe her lipstick or whatever, but it was eventually, how the men reported was that there was a condom in it. So she was called on TV and she was ridiculed, and she was, and everybody was quiet about it, and this is how women sometimes suffer even in the parliaments. And now in our parliaments, we do sit together with men, and we do participate in different activities, and we say whatever we want to say, but at the same time, we have different lobbies of tea where we do not sit together. And some of the women are not, they don't expect us to come and even sit in the male lobby sometimes. And they would really notice sometimes that, what kind of dress you're wearing. And it's very sexist, I would say, that the remarks we sometimes go through. But I think that all the women in the parliament, and we would call ourselves political workers, to be honest, all the women in politics are very strong and brave in the sense dealing with this society where the men who have come from this macho system, I think they are, everybody is fighting their role very well, and they do know when to say and what to say, and whatever they say is sometimes very bold for the men who are there from long time, maybe 70s, and they see the change and sometimes they retaliate, and we do face the scandals, the character assassination and all that stuff. But I think that the impression people get about women in parliament is also like through the media, and it should really be condemned when a woman is discussed on media. Must ask her, because this society needs this change, that the woman should be asked before her character assassination is done. Even on social media, there is a news, she should be called on TV, she should be looked after, and yes, if there is any movement, we are in it with you, because it's absolutely important for us as well, because we become more prominent sitting in the parliament, and we become more target of a lot of nonsense sometimes. So we are not working in any NGO, and we do not have support of maybe very many international organizations. But as persons, as women, we would really like that you ladies and gents and students sitting here should visit our parliament, come and sit there and see what happens, how much bills we bring, how much work the women do. All the questions, you would be surprised, are mostly from the women. They do a lot of work, but the recognition is less, and we really need to work on it. It starts from the bottom to top or top to bottom, I don't know, but we have to work on it. And thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for both of you of gracing this occasion with your presence. Now I would like to call upon Dr. Farzana Bari, the Director of Center of Excellence in Gender Studies, for sharing her experience of this whole journey that we have together of these 2 days, and maybe her own insights about that. Dr. Farzana Bari.
First of all, I apologize, and especially Neloufer, that I think you deserve. I'm sure there must be a lot of questions, people could have asked, and so we are basically running late. In view of the, first of all, I think that on behalf of my Center of Excellence in Gender Studies, I thank you to everyone who presented papers, who presented and participated in this conference. I think we had an extremely productive and thought-provoking discussion over the last 2.5 days that was truly really invigorating for all of us. The very fact that I think that we are able to come together across borders, especially at the times when there's a lot of tension going on between India and Pakistan, and to hold this conversations, I think, simply a matter of great celebration. We created this space for critical reflection and to produce insight on possible pathways that could lead to solidarity and social change for a just society. I think listening to papers and this discussion from the floor, it was comforting to see that common trend in the analysis of the larger structures of power that shape hierarchical orders of our society. In the session on I think maybe looking at, in the interest of time, because I thought our Vice-Chancellor is going to be here, and maybe there are some of our guests who are here actually. I must also acknowledge Her Excellency Ambassador from Germany is sitting here, and also the representative from the European Union is here. So I thought initially that in the interest of those who have not been able to participate in the last 2 days, that I will do a little bit of recapping. But looking at everyone, each one of you, I think you deserve to have tea and coffee, and probably it's become a long day. So if it's okay, maybe I skip that. I skipped that recapping because I thought very briefly, I thought each section, sort of the key issue. But I think but I would certainly like to see, talk about that what is in this conference that it will stay with us, and I think that will be conversation which we will be having amongst ourselves as well. Amongst the faculty as well as our gender studies students and also the rest of the student body in the university. I think that, so I'm skipping all the sort of the summary of the key points which I think are and very valid points which our panelists and our discussant had brought into our sort of, But I think there are two things which I definitely like to. One which G has raised, I think my apologies, G, his, this call for basically what he, in his paper, that he begins with although he begins with the critique of feminist hegemony that is being fractured by the feminism, and he focused on the situation of transgender people in India. G calls upon feminism to move away from those biological essentialism and into, he called that double gender consciousness. Okay, we need to understand, and I think that seems a lot of sense that we must be thinking about that in view of the way we are destabilizing gender women as a category, and I think we have to see what are we replacing, what are the other categories which can come to our better understanding. So I think the G's call for moving away from that biological essentialism to gender consciousness, and I would say maybe multi-layered gender consciousness in order to challenge and ultimately replace fixed categories and the notion of gender. I think the other thing which Fatima and Saad has talked about, I think they their paper was on Sufism. So both of them, I think what they have talked about, that made us to think more deeply about the binary of inner self as interconnected continuum. They call for an insertion of self in academic feminist discourse. They argue that the liberation of inner of self, the liberation of inner self can bring peace and harmony, and not to the self alone, but to others and to the outer world. I think we need to also think and reflect, how we, in a way, somehow, how do we define self? But I think this is something for us to continue to debate and make sense of each other's, standpoints. Moving to, I think what was important for me, because I said right at the beginning, because being also an academic and an activist academic, I call myself, and I think most of our gender studies faculty, actually they are activist academics. So for us, we are always trying to see where how our academic positions are going to inform our politics, and then how, when we are in the field, the politics on the ground is going to inform our understanding. So I think we are very happy with this whole notion of when we are trying to deconstruct women as a category and destabilize it and come up with the intersectionality feminism.